So the term revenge porn was something I had never heard of until several years ago when I was submitting live testimony for Jennifer's Law in Connecticut, which ended up passing and included revenge porn as part of the coercive control that is part of the what's covered by Jennifer's Law in terms of protecting people. And so today's guest is going to talk about that and more, including something called cyber sex abuse. So welcome, Lindsay Lieberman, and please tell us who you are and what you do, because it is something I had never heard of, and I think a lot of people would benefit from finding out what you do and how you can help.
Yes, well, thank you so much, Lisa, for having me on this podcast. I'm so impressed by you and Chris and all the amazing work that you guys do at Been There, Got Out. So I'm thrilled to be here. I am an attorney, and I specialize in representing victims of sexual violence and also cyber sexual violence, of which revenge porn is one of those more commonly thought of examples.
Yeah, no, revenge porn really stood out in my head because several years ago, Chris and I went to Barbados. We were actually training attorneys and domestic violence advocates over there. And when we started talking about revenge porn, we found out that many of the people in that room had actually been affected by it. It's a huge thing in Barbados.
It's a huge thing all over the world. And it's also relatively new in the sense that since internet and digital cyber has come to be, it's become a lot more easy to do. So just to define it real quick, I like to put revenge porn in quotes because it's not a great way of referring to what's happening. It's basically the non-consensual distribution of another person's naked or sexual or intimate photos or videos. It's a huge violation. It's happening everywhere. I think a study in 2016 reported that already by 2016, 10 million Americans had already become victim to it.
And that's just Americans.
That's just Americans. And yet the laws have been really slow to keep up with these types of cyber sex crimes. So revenge porn specifically is still actually legal in 2 states in our country.
What?
Yep. Massachusetts, which is shocking to people. They are just about ready to pass a law currently. It should happen soon, hopefully. And also South Carolina. And that's just one of the many issues with the legal system when it comes to cyber sex abuse crimes. Another being that there's no federal law yet, there's no federal crime. So oftentimes when we think about cyber sex abuse, you think about a lot of crossing of jurisdictions because a person or perpetrator in one state could be hurting and harassing a person in another state. And depending on the state's laws and the law enforcement's willingness to take these cases and investigate, it would be really helpful if we had a federal criminal statute that could cover all of these situations.
Wow. Okay. Well, talk about what exactly is cyber sex abuse, like some other examples, and also what you do.
So cyber sex abuse is a big, broad term that covers basically any type of behavior online where a perpetrator is using tech or an internet connection to cause harm in a sexual manner and like the type of like a sexual violation. So while revenge porn or image-based sexual abuse is one of the very common types, another very common type that we often see in cases of domestic violence is called sextortion. And sextortion is like extortion or blackmail. And it's when the perpetrator uses the threat of revenge porn in order to maintain that leverage and control and keep their partner in an otherwise abusive relationship.
Wow. Okay. So when you talked about causing harm, when we were doing the conference in Barbados and the participants were sharing, about how revenge porn harmed them, they gave me some surprising answers, which I hadn't considered. Can you talk about how cyber sex crimes cause harm to the victim, but also not only to the victim?
Absolutely. What we generally see happen is when a perpetrator commits this kind of crime against his partner or his ex-partner, they do so in a way to cause as much harm as possible. So let's say they take someone's naked picture or video and they post it online, maybe on a porn website. Oftentimes, it's not just the picture or the video that's posted, but their identifying information as well. So now, not only is this person's private content out there, but her social media handles and maybe her address, maybe her telephone number are published alongside of it. So we all know how hard it can be to get content removed from the internet. And so what happens is a person winds up with this permanent digital record of this very private sexual violation, and their identifying information accompanied to it. So the harm is humiliation, lack of self-esteem, fear. I've had clients who wind up with stalkers because they have access to this information and this sexual content, and they wind up going after my clients. Um, Victims of revenge porn report depression, anxiety. It can impact your career because if your Google search results show your naked, intimate content, then it's going to cause employers to take a second thought before hiring you or before offering you that interview. And there's been terribly drastic tragedies in which people have been so impacted by cyber sex abuse crimes that they've gone to such extremes of taking their own lives. And I'm curious to hear what kind of response you got in Barbados when you ran that.
Okay, well, first of all, and I wrote it down because, of course, I'm a major note taker, and as you're talking, I'm thinking of things I want to say as well. But we have had a few clients who have had to deal with cyber sex crimes and revenge porn. But in Barbados, they mentioned something that you didn't mention, and that's the way that the families of the victims were affected. Because community is very important in this particular culture and in many parts of the world. When something happens to somebody, it affects their family and it brings a tremendous amount of shame. So again, it's not just the victim and the victim's job, but the people connected to them. And in Barbados, church is like a huge part of their lives, and so people talk all the time, and so everyone is affected.
Yes, absolutely. And I was going to say religion can also play a part in it. And I find that perpetrators will specifically violate their partners in certain ways, knowing what the religious like attitude is
Mhm.
towards sexuality or nudity. And that can cause even more harm based on the victim's family members and what their morals and values are. So for them to find out that there's a naked picture of their child, their daughter or son, can be even more devastating for the client, the family, and of course, in cases of domestic violence and divorce, this often comes up and is quite complicated because if there are children involved, and we're bringing up issues of sexual privacy violations and naked pictures and videos, of course, all parties are conscious of the impact that it could have on the children. Um, and also, in my opinion, in most cases, still needs to be brought up in one way or another and accounted for because it's such a serious offense to commit against somebody.
You're reminding me of a client we had maybe a year or two ago, and she had filed restraining orders. She had been granted restraining orders. Her ex was posting all kinds of nude pictures and committing revenge porn, and he was continuing to violate the restraining orders, and she was getting so frustrated. It was a family court situation. I don't remember how much criminal was involved, but it was like no matter what pieces of paper she had, her ex was violating it and nothing was happening. And of course, this was making her more and more upset. She had young children and it just took over her whole life.
Absolutely. And it's terrifying. And assuming she wasn't in Massachusetts or South Carolina, she could have, and hopefully, at some point learned she could go to the police. She could hire an attorney like myself. I represent victims of these kinds of sexual privacy violations. And sometimes when you're reaching dead ends and not getting the help you need in family court with the restraining order, there are other options and there are other things that someone can do. Unfortunately, the court systems and even law enforcement, they aren't as familiar with these kinds of crimes because they're relatively new and still evolving. So oftentimes survivors of these crimes need an advocate, need an attorney or somebody on their side explaining to the court or explaining to their own divorce lawyer or explaining to the police what crime was committed, why this is important, what the consequences need to be, and help that survivor to get safe and get proper restrictions of his behavior in place. I mean, that's just absurd.
So it sounds like part of your job really involves educating professionals through your clients' individual cases.
Yes. So thank you for asking. Let me clarify. So I don't represent anyone in divorce cases. I don't practice matrimonial law, but I do work on divorce cases as a consultant and as co-counsel in a sense, where I can partner with the divorce attorney to, like you said, educate and explain and contextualize some of these issues that often come up, but many attorneys don't feel equipped to handle. Like, how do we deal with cyber sexual privacy violations in divorce and custody? Because it's complicated. And how do we explain to the judge how serious this is? And it's very nuanced and it's very niche. And I find that it can be very helpful for people navigating divorce to have that sort of backup, to have more of the advocate to work with them to get justice.
Yeah, I'm thinking about how so many divorce attorneys specialize in matrimonial law, but with these niche situations, they might not be on top of the latest laws. That's actually in our book. We have a section on what kinds of questions to ask a prospective attorney. And after the book came up, someone said, ask the attorney, or actually, no, it was in the book for that printing. They said, make sure to ask your attorney how they stay on top of the laws, the latest laws. But I imagine there's so many laws that come out all the time. How can anyone stay on top of it? When you have another lawyer coming in to educate, it's really helpful. Just like people who are getting divorced who own a business together, we've been told by a business attorney, it's like two divorces. You need to have your regular divorce attorney, but you really need a business attorney to help teach the family lawyer about the details of the case, because that's significant in this particular situation.
Absolutely. And also, not only are the laws evolving and new, and it can be very helpful to have someone that's up to date on the laws, but it's also really important to be up to date on the myths and the attitudes that we all are holding about these kinds of offenses. So, for example, just how in the past, and maybe even now, people would ask victims of sexual assault and rape, why did she wear such a short skirt if she didn't want to be hurt or she didn't want to be violated? Unfortunately, people nowadays ask, well, why did she take a naked picture? Why did she create that content if she didn't want to be published all over the internet? And so sadly, people still have these very outdated ideas and judgments, mostly and oftentimes affecting women in particular, although I do represent men as well. And it's very important that lawyers understand these issues and how to lawyer in a way that isn't judgmental and doesn't re-traumatize their clients, because they understand how society works now, why the laws are what they are, and why we can't victim blame.
Right. And also, I'm thinking artificial intelligence. You don't even need to take a naked picture. Tell us about how artificial intelligence is affecting this, because nobody seems to be able to keep up with that.
Exactly. It's a great point. So even somebody who's never taken a naked picture of themselves or a naked video, has never even thought about sending any type of content like that, isn't actually safe anymore from this kind of threat. And that's because, like you said, artificial intelligence allows somebody who wants to harm you to take to use tech to do that, to create revenge porn. They can actually take a picture of your face or a video of you talking and attach it to another person's naked body. And the tech is so good now that it looks like it's your naked body. um, and reports are finding that the kind of pain and suffering that somebody experiences, even if it's not their body, can be just as bad as if it were their body. Because to everyone else who's seeing it, it appears to be them, and it's such a violation. States are starting to recognize this as a crime, and so a handful of states have now been passing legislation to criminalize the creation of deep fake pornography, which is another way to refer to that.
Right. Yeah. And I was thinking about artificial intelligence in general in terms of evidence and truth. And are it's frightening because I feel like how is anyone ever going to be able to present evidence and get through cases quickly when we don't even know what's real anymore?
Right. And what can we rely on? And
Right.
unfortunately, so far in my cases where I've had situations like that, it winds up being that you need to bring in expensive forensic witnesses, and you need, and hopefully it shouldn't have to be that way. Hopefully we get to a point where law enforcement has the training and the police can actually uncover these cyber crimes better. Because if they have the evidence, I mean, it's a crime.
Mhm.
And so then that evidence can be used in family court or in whatever other proceedings are going on. But what I find is that oftentimes the police don't want to deal with these cases because they're so like technological, and it's hard to investigate these cases, and they don't necessarily have the resources or the know-how to take on these complex cybercrime cases.
Yeah, we have interviewed a man named Vance Long several times who is he's like a cybersecurity expert, and he is working directly with police departments as quickly as possible. But he's saying that's who we really need to train because nobody can keep up with this.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's really frightening for survivors. And it's frightening for survivors whose pictures and videos are out there, or who are in a relationship with somebody who's using pictures and videos to keep them in the relationship through that coercive control and blackmail.
Yeah. Now, so talk a little more about coercive control and how that impacts what you do.
So amazing work getting Jennifer's Law passed in Connecticut. As you know, and I'm sure many of your listeners know, coercive control is, it's the unseen form of domestic violence. It doesn't leave black and blues or bruises. And so it's the psychological, emotional, sometimes financial abuse that happens in domestic violence relationships. But it can be hard to spot, it can be hard to prove, it can be hard for people who aren't in our industry to even understand, because it's not necessarily seen as physical abuse is. And um, also, it's just starting to wind up becoming criminal. In many states, as you know, it's not even a way that anyone can get legal recourse. In some states, it's criminal. Some states it's a basis to get an order of protection, but in many states it's not even like on their radar, and yet it's such a common and devastating form of abuse. So with me and my background working with victims of domestic violence and sexual violence, being trauma sensitive and trauma informed, I understand the nuances of coercive control. And so, again, when it comes to domestic violence and divorce, I'm able to work with divorce attorneys so that they can help their clients really really navigate those complicated cases in the best way possible for their client, for the victim of that abuse. Um, in cases where maybe there's not a divorce, uh, maybe it's a boyfriend girlfriend situation or ex, I'll help my clients by taking them to family court, and I'll get restraining orders for them. And also in some cases there might be a lawsuit that can be brought, or there might be criminal charges, and I can advocate for my client with the police in order for them to take police action. Um, so, and that's of course with cyber sex abuse, sexual assault, and to the extent that there are laws on the books in that jurisdiction for coercive control.
Yeah. I mean, coercive control in my mind, we've done some presentations on it, but it actually goes against the US Constitution because it's a liberty crime. And like you said, just like with revenge porn, where just the threat of doing something is a way to keep someone dependent on another person. And anything that somebody else does, which keeps you dependent on them, you talked about financial, et cetera, just even that threat is harming someone. It doesn't allow us to have our individual freedom. And so again, it may be invisible, but I think, especially for an attorney like you can help make those cases that say it's not physical, but it's possibly even more powerful of a crime because of these particular ways this person is not allowed to live independently.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's not seen, so it has to be explained. It has to be explained, not just the legal aspects of it, but also the psychological aspects and the emotional aspects. So I mean, that's all part of it. And it's wild. I know that there's a lot of controversy about it, and passing this kind of legislation, like you said, like um it's not that popular in a lot of jurisdictions.
Yeah. That surprised me. I've interviewed and spoken with attorneys who said we don't want coercive control laws. In the testimony for Jennifer's Law, some major domestic violence organizations in the state of Connecticut were saying we don't really support it because we fear that it can be used against victims. And it has been, of course.
Right. And every avenue towards justice that is available to victims can be used against them. We see that when people go and get a restraining order against their victim and
All
use
the time.
the justice system as a sword, um, which is why it's so important that the attorneys handling these cases understand the relationship, understand what abuse looks like, so that they can argue that, they can point that out, that that becomes part of the case, in order to right the wrongs.
Yeah. Now, people are often scared of hiring a lawyer, especially with something like this. Can you talk a little bit about that, as well as the importance of trauma-sensitive lawyering?
Yes. I've had friends who have had situations where they've possibly wanted to hire attorneys, and they call me and they're so scared. And it's funny because I've been a lawyer for over a decade. So I can't relate to the fear, but I understand because so many people I talk to are afraid. And I imagine it's because um, people assume that lawyers are scary, that people assume that you only go to a lawyer when you're in trouble. People don't realize that lawyers like me exist, specifically focusing on victims' rights. So oftentimes when something bad happens to somebody, they're Googling and they're looking for a lawyer, but they only find the prosecutor who um, represents the government and pursues the crime against the defendant. And then they see defense attorneys. But this victim hasn't done anything wrong. And so they're entitled to representation, and they're entitled to they have legal rights, they have legal options, and they don't really know that we exist. Um, I think people also think that just to call a law firm will cost them money. And of course, some cases, some law firms, I offer free consultations. So many law firms do offer that free time to just talk through the issue and see if the lawyer can work with the client.
That's amazing. Pause right there, because I think, yes, many people assume you are going to be paying hundreds, if not more, because we're in New York, thousands of dollars for an hour consult. So that's incredible that you offer a free consult.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's starting to become more and more rare as I hear through the grapevine. But I just think it's so important to avoid re-traumatizing people, and somebody should not have to feel forced to dish up some money in order to like find out what their rights are, or if this is even going to work for them, or what they can do. um so and also it's important to say that for some cases that I handle, maybe it does wind up being a billable case where they will pay for my services if they choose to. But in other cases, it could be a contingency lawsuit. So lawsuits can be brought on behalf of survivors of sexual violence and cyber sexual abuse, for monetary damages. And in those cases, oftentimes, a lawyer would take the case on contingency, and the client doesn't have to pay until and unless there's a settlement or a verdict and money is recovered for them.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm so glad that we're talking and that people are going to be able to learn a lot during this interview, because again, like you said, people don't even realize that there's lawyers like you out there, and they don't realize that they could possibly have a free conversation just to find out their rights, instead of thinking, I don't have thousands and thousands of dollars to spend, so I'm not even going to bother um, trying to protect myself.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, I'm so glad to spread the word. And then you also asked about trauma informed lawyering.
Yes.
And so that's huge. And that's something that I'm actually spreading throughout other law firms as well. So I'm going into law firms and teaching other lawyers and their staff how to be more trauma informed, trauma sensitive with their clients and their potential clients. It's critical. It basically it assumes and recognizes that the person with whom we're talking has experienced trauma, and especially if they're coming to you because they need a lawyer, they most likely have. Even if it's not sexual violence or domestic violence, it could be a car accident and that person has suffered trauma. And so recognizing that and accounting for that and communicating with them in a way that makes them feel safe and empowered and avoids re-traumatizing them, that is all part of trauma informed care when it comes to the legal system. um, I've had my own experiences talking to lawyers and feeling like, oh my gosh, I would never refer a client
Right?
to that law firm. I can't believe they just talked to me like that, and I'm a lawyer. And my philosophy is that nobody should ever leave a law firm feeling worse off than they did before they got that call, before they talked to that law firm. There's just no reason for that.
Uh,
So yeah.
you're saying that, and I'm thinking of how many, I mean, we only deal with high conflict divorce, post separation issues, and separation as well. And you would not believe the amount of trauma that is compounded for our clients by their own attorneys, sometimes with the way that they speak to them, yell at them, threaten to leave them during trial. It's astonishing. And I think it's so important to train lawyers like that. As you're talking, I'm like, that's kind of what Chris and I have done when we've done lunch and learns. Obviously, we're not attorneys, but we are trauma informed, and we position it to lawyers sometimes, because they're like, why do I want to listen to a high conflict divorce coach? Is here's ways that you can actually retain your clients, because clients need attorneys that are more sensitive, and they are going to walk away. Many of our clients are on their third lawyer or more, and a lot of it has to do with the treatment that they faced during other trauma and throughout these years long cases that they're stuck in the legal system.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really important part of being a lawyer that a lot of people don't recognize. You know, we hear about like bulldogs and shark lawyers and like, oh, they're going to fight and they're going to like crush it in court. But there's like a whole other part of being a lawyer, which is to be able to get along and support your client and empower them and make them feel safe after what was probably a very scary and traumatizing experience. And for a lot of lawyers, it doesn't come naturally, and it's not something that's taught in school. And I think a lot of lawyers think like, well, I'm not a therapist.
Mhm.
Let the client go get a therapy. I'm not going to be able to help with that. But I have a completely different perspective. I think as a lawyer, we have a duty to be compassionate and supportive of our clients. And there is some overlap with offering that compassion and care and concern for them as human beings. And I agree with you with your point that it's in their interest
Right.
to learn these skills because they'll retain their clients, they'll get better reviews, they'll get better, it'll impact their reputation in a positive way. And it's good for business and it's good for people.
Right.
It's win-win.
Yeah, I know. And I have to say, so many people, when they meet us or even beforehand, they'll send us messages saying, do you know a lawyer who gets it? Do you know, and we call them the unicorns, like the ones who understand what I'm going through. It's really an attractive trait, if not one of the top traits that our clients all look for. They want to feel heard. They want to feel understood. They're not looking for, I mean, many of us, including me in the past, have treated our lawyers like they're our therapists because they know so much about our lives and we're in the middle of this chaos. But it is helpful to have a lawyer that is sensitive.
Absolutely. And that's why it can be a good collaboration for me to come on board, to be part of the team, so that I can do, for example, more of the client facing work to
Mhm.
work with the client and then give the information to the divorce attorney so that they can go to court and argue the divorce. But for that client management, it's just so critical. And that's a nice place where I can come in and be helpful to other divorce attorneys. But I just had a client last week who was just having a day, and she was really angry with me, and she was just emoting. And then finally she said, this is my trauma. This is not you. This is my trauma. I've been acting like this with my family, my friends. And I said, I totally get it. I Of course. Like, let's work through this together. We can figure this out. And it was just a recent relevant example of and then and then we wound up connecting even greater after
Mm.
we put that out there. We got it out, we hashed it out, and then there was even more connection. And with that connection comes trust and comes more honesty and building your case better, and ultimately winding up with the most successful outcomes.
Yeah, and with that, and we had an experience like that with a client who seemed like she was getting really angry at us, and then we worked through it, and it also brought us closer. But I think that that is also a way to empower our clients to to develop their confidence in terms of conflict resolution. Also, because we see it go where they just clash and they say, "I'm moving to another attorney. I can't deal with this person." It's an important skill to learn that even if you disagree or if you butt heads, that there's ways to work through it together and not just end the relationship.
Absolutely, absolutely. So you can kind of develop all of these skills
Right.
in this representation, which is so cool. It's like such a awesome that, like, for such a bad experience to happen, to be able to then learn so much and develop skills and tools that you can use for the rest of your life. I mean, I love my work. I feel like it's an opportunity to really make people's lives so much better in so many ways. Some people want legal action, they want lawsuits and criminal arrests, and some people just want to be heard, and they
Mm.
want to know what their rights are, and they want to know that they're not alone and that they have options even if they choose not to take them. They want to feel empowered. Um, and I like to think that that's what I do for my clients, and I love it. It's really rewarding.
Yeah, you sound like me. You sound like you're taking the words out of my mouth. That's exactly the kinds of things that I say. Well, before I forget, I know that you've talked often about victims, and you've said she. But one of the things that you told me that was a little bit surprising is that you do represent men. How can men be victims of revenge porn or cyber sex?
Yes,
crime?
great question.
Right.
It is true. I see it less in divorce cases specifically, but it is important to spread awareness that men more often than women wind up being victims of these online sextortion scams.
More often than women? You just said more often than women, right?
Yes, that's right.
Wow. I
It's a very specific type of case, but men are potentially more likely or willing to put their guard down when communicating online with somebody. So they might
really?
believe that the person they're communicating with is the, let's say, very attractive woman whose picture they see. But in reality, we don't really know who's behind that identity, who's communicating.
This
And
is like the whole catfish thing.
exactly.
I love that series.
Exactly. So they wind up tricking people, oftentimes men, into exposing themselves, whether it's masturbating or sharing secrets. And as soon as they give over that leverage, they give something of value to the scammer on the other end, then the threats start. And it's, pay me $5,000 or I'm going to release this video of you masturbating to your employees, or I'm going to tell your wife that you're having an affair. And so oftentimes we see men become victims of these kinds of crimes and they have no idea where to go or what to do. There's a lot of shame and humiliation involved. So they're unlikely to go and ask for help. They don't know where to go. Um, and yet there's help out there. So these are the kinds of cases that I can help with. Oftentimes when they go to the police aren't able to take these cases because they're so common. And oftentimes the extorter is overseas somewhere in like a basement or even in like a scam factory where they're just doing this to millions of people. But there is
Wait, scam factor? What can you explain that a little bit? I'm like, I have an image all of a sudden, and what is a scam factory?
It's so sad, but in other countries, people are basically imprisoned in factories in which they're forced to go online and pretend to be people that they're not and trick unsuspecting internet users into providing naked pictures or videos and then extort them for money.
Are there certain areas of the world where this is more common?
Um, yes, I want to say Thailand is the country that I heard most recently had these like factories,
Wow.
you know.
Oh my
It's so
God.
it's so it's horrible. So the scale is huge, but there's a lot of like crisis management that I can do with my clients when this comes up. And I can help them get through the situation and I can empower them with the information that they need in order to understand, like, can I do something? And what does that look like? And how do I get ahead of this if I need to? And what are the chances that this does get published and I am exposed? So there's a
So
lot of strategy work there.
yeah, so Lindsay, you had said that a lot of people think that this could never happen to them, but it can happen to anybody. Are there any ways that the regular person can try to protect themselves, or are we all just vulnerable targets depending on who we get involved with or think we're
Well,
getting involved with?
right. We can never know. And I'm the last person to ever say, like, you have to be smart and discerning because that's putting the burden on the victim. And I'm not going to do that.
Right.
So we have to be, we have to understand that these things are going to happen. One of my efforts and one of the things I'm doing in my business is I'm going into schools and to like parent groups and trying to educate the next generation about cyber safety and how to be a responsible digital citizen. Because my hope is that future generations will grow up with just like a better, more moral mindset and like more informed approach towards using the internet. Um, and so that's my hope, especially because I've got two little kids at home. I'm hoping that they grow up in a safer world. Um, Obviously, there are resources out there, there are attorneys to help after something bad happens, but prevention is a huge part of my goals. And so I also go into colleges and I teach Greek organizations like sororities and fraternities about smart, safe cyber use. Um, and again, law enforcement trainings. There's so much education that needs to be happening, that can happen. And so I'm hoping that the more we can do that, and I know you guys are doing that too. It's so cool. We should collaborate.
As we were talking, I'm like, okay, there's 3 attorneys I need to introduce her to. I got to get her for the course.
Great. I'd love to work with you. I mean, we're doing really similar overlapping work, and that would be amazing. So
Yeah.
so that's my hope for a brighter, safer future.
Yeah, it's very exciting, and from one optimist to another, yeah, I love when hope is passed around instead of just the doom.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, very exciting. Okay, so Lindsay, how can people find you?
My website is lindsaylieberman.com. I'm Lindsay Lieberman ESQ on Instagram. I've got LinkedIn, and I welcome any calls or questions, connections. And thank you again, Lisa, so much for having me.
No, thank you so much, and I am definitely going to follow up. My brain is spinning with ideas.
Wonderful. Such a
Okay,
pleasure.
yeah. Okay, we'll talk soon.
Bye bye.
Bye.